Within You is the Power by Henry Thomas Hamblin. Read to you by Blue Friend. Chapter 10. Character Building and the Overcoming of Habit. Character building is the greatest object in life. It has been said that character is the only thing we can take with us when we depart this life. This is perfectly true. Therefore, the object of all religion, not religiousness, mental training, and development should be the building of character. A religion that does not build up character is worthless. Those who think they can flop through life, avoid as far as possible its discipline, make no effort to improve their character, and through believing in a certain creed can miraculously become perfect simply by dying, are deceiving themselves. We do not become perfect, for example, of a strong and perfect character, either by believing in a creed or through dying, but by attainment. God helps those who help themselves, and those people who will not strive after better things cut themselves off from all the glorious and wonderful possibilities of attainment. Before, however, thinking about such lofty things as entering the path of attainment and becoming changed into and modeled after the divine image, the average person may wish to know how to overcome bad habits and weaknesses of character which are keeping him down in life and possibly undermining his health. Most people are conscious of some wrong habits that ought to be overcome, and weaknesses of character which should be eradicated. Possibly they have fought against their habits or weaknesses for years, prayed until they are tired of praying, made innumerable attempts at turning over a new leaf, yet all in vain, for they are as firmly in the toil as ever. Many people give up the struggle and endeavor to lead a sort of Jekyll and Hyde existence, being outwardly a Christian or righteous person, but inwardly something quite different. Yet they find no satisfaction in this dual life, for they know that they are drifting towards an abyss. Yet there is a way of escape that is open to all. The Infinite One has provided man with powers that are apparently unlimited, powers which can be used either to build up the life and character or to destroy them. These powers are those of the subconscious mind. This mind is a reservoir of unlimited, tireless forces, and becomes, if we use it right, our best friend, or if we misuse it, our worst enemy. Every time a bad action is indulged in, wonderful changes take place in the nervous system, and energy becomes stored up in certain cells so as to make it easier to do that wrong act on a future occasion. It is equally true that every time a good action is done, similar changes, but in a reverse direction, take place that make the doing of the same action easier in the future. This explains the tremendous power of habit. Our body, brain, and nervous system become changed, either for the worse or the better, according to the type of action indulged in. We do not yet fully realize what a wonderful adventure life is. We are entrusted with tremendous powers, and by their use or misuse, we can either destroy ourselves or build up our character in every possible direction. What a responsibility, yet what a glorious opportunity. In order, however, to find a way of escape from evil habit and weakness of character, we must go deeper than actual deeds, for actions are effects of hidden causes. The cause of all action is thought. A thought, someone has said, is an action in the process of being born. It is true that we possess primitive desires and impulses, but these can be transmuted into noble actions and high achievement simply by directing the thoughts and attention to higher and better things. For instance, the powers of sex become transmuted into brain power if the thoughts and attention are completely transferred from sex to intellectual pursuits. If, however, thoughts are allowed to dwell upon sex or passion, then the kingdom becomes divided against itself, and man begins to drift towards the abyss. The strain of modern life is filling our asylums, yet there are those who can work 15 or 18 hours a day and thrive on it, although engaged in severely trying brain work. These have learned to transmute their lower powers into higher. This is not done by means of esoteric or occult practices, but by obeying the divine injunction to set our affections on things above. In other words, to keep our thoughts and attention fixed upon higher and better aims, ambitions, and pursuits. It is impossible to overcome bad habits by fighting them, for the more we fight them, the stronger they become. The injunction to resist not evil is very applicable to habit. The way of escape is not by fighting evil or wrong habit, no matter what its character may be, but by concentrating upon building a good habit that shall cut the ground from under the feet of the bad one, or by turning the attention to higher and better things. Whatever we fix our attention upon, or whatever it is that we idealize, our subconscious mind endeavors to actualize and make real in our life. By fighting a habit, we direct subconscious attention to it, and this is fatal. If, however, we turn our whole attention to something entirely different, and which is higher and better, all the powers of the subconscious are directed towards the production in the life and body of the new object of attention. We see, therefore, that we do not have to overcome habit. If we did, our task would be hopeless, for the human will be helpless before the power of the subconscious mind. The subconscious powers can be led by the imagination, but they cannot be coerced by the will. The will must be used not to fight the habit, but in raising and directing the attention to something higher and better. By this means, a new habit is formed. The attention of the subconscious mind is taken away from the bad habit, and all its powers directed towards the creation of a new and better one. The subconscious does not care what the habit is. It is indifferent as to whether it is good or bad. It is just as willing to produce a good habit as a bad one. We, each of us, therefore, hold our fate in our own hands. We can, by controlling our thoughts and imagination, and by directing our attention to better things, focus all the powers of the subconscious on the building up of good habits, or, on the other hand, we can, by allowing our thoughts and mental pictures to dwell upon undesirable things and our attention to be directed to low or weak ideals, fall into undesirable habits. The power that produces the habits is the same in each case. It is the way in which this power is directed that is the vital and essential thing. It is very necessary to point out that right thinking and correct use of the imagination must be accompanied by corresponding right action. Many people make use of autosuggestion and expect it to destroy their bad habits and build up better ones, but it never will or can do so unaided. Autosuggestion is useless if it is not followed by constructive action. Young people should expend their energies in physical culture and games. Older people should interest themselves in hobbies and intellectual pursuits. It is only advanced students who can control their thoughts so that they can govern their life forces by mental means. Those less advanced, when attacked by evil or weak thoughts, must get up and do something quite different, and thus get their minds off the forbidden subject and interested in the new object of attention. It is a case of directing the desires and life forces into different channels by controlling the thought and attention. Here is seen the value of true religion, for it brings fresh ideals into the life and directs the attention to higher and better things. The writer realizes that a change must take place in the heart of the individual before he can desire these better things. When, however, this change has taken place, the battle has only just begun, for each one has to work out his own salvation. At first, then, most people will find it necessary to do something in order to attract their attention and guide their thoughts to something quite different from the forbidden subject. Later on, however, when they become more advanced in the science of right thinking, they will be able to direct their thoughts into any desired direction. This necessitates constant vigilance. Each thought has to be carefully scrutinized before being allowed to pass the threshold of the mind. By reversing every negative or unworthy or ignoble thought into its opposite, a change is wrought in the brain and nervous system. The cells formerly used for wrong thinking and for the production of wrong action go out of use, as new cells are brought in to use for the production of right action. This stage leads to one higher still, when it becomes a settled habit to reverse bad thoughts into good ones and perform right actions instead of bad or weak ones. The power of the subconscious mind, which at one time seemed so evil, produces right action more or less automatically. When once the habit of cleaning the teeth is established, there is experienced an uncomfortable feeling until they have been attended to. When once a dirty person has learned to wash himself thoroughly and keep himself decent, he will feel uncomfortable if he gets dirty. The same rule applies in the more important things and habits of life. If only those who are in the bondage of habit will only direct their thoughts and attention to the building up of good habits, their old weaknesses will die a natural death. It must not be thought that the victory over lifelong habits is easy. It may seem so at first, but sooner or later temptation will come with added force, which may result in a sad fall. If this should happen, it is most important that too much attention should not be paid to the incident. Instead, the beginner should pick himself up and, making a mental note of the immediate cause of this downfall, thus benefiting by the experience, press on again towards freedom. It is most helpful to realize that not only is the subconscious mind willing to be guided aright, if we will only persevere long enough, until even persevering itself becomes a habit, but that we will also have behind us all of the spiritual powers of God. The Infinite One sees to it that the odds are not overwhelming against us. Our difficulties are not insurmountable, although they may appear to be so. We can always win through if we faint not. Heaven looks on with sympathetic interest and rejoices with the struggler when he succeeds, and mourns with him when he fails. The struggle is a stiff one, for it is only by this that the seeker after God can become strong in character, but the victory can always be won. When the situation appears hopeless, let the struggling one remember that there is a way of escape somewhere, and that God, who is freedom and deliverer, will reveal it to him if he faints not. If all who seek deliverance will realize that the power of the Infinite is on their side, and that they are bound to become victors if they will only keep on, they must succeed. And what a joy is theirs! There is no happiness quite like that which comes to those who have overcome habit and weakness of character. May every reader experience this supreme joy of overcoming. Chapter 11. Happiness and Joy. Deep down in every heart is an unquenchable desire for happiness. The advanced soul desires happiness just as much as the pleasure-seeking worldling. The difference between them is simply that the former, through knowledge and experience, does not search for happiness, knowing that it can never be found by direct seeking, but finds it through service and love to others and in victory over self, while the latter seeks happiness, like the will-o'-the-wisp, in every form of pleasure and finds it not. Man is never satisfied with his life. He is forever seeking something that is better. Until he learns wisdom, he looks for it in pleasure, in sense gratification of various kinds, in wealth, luxury, and possession. The less evolved a man is, the more convinced he is that happiness can be gained in these ways, and the lower are his desires. For instance, those who form what is called the underworld of our cities seek happiness in vice and debauchery. Those who are more evolved seek pleasure in more refined things, hoping to find happiness in intellectual pursuits, friendships, and in pure human loves. These more evolved types get much more pleasure through the senses than do those who are more elemental, but they are capable also of greater and more acute suffering. They can derive great pleasure from a picture gallery, whereas a savage would see nothing interesting at all. They can also suffer from things which a savage would not be capable of feeling. Yet, in spite of this developed refinement and ability to derive pleasure from art, science, literature, etc., happiness is still as far off as ever. All attempts at finding happiness lead finally to emptiness. There is no satisfaction either in wealth and all that it can command, getting on in life, or in fame and power. They allure at first and promise happiness, but they fail us, and finally are seen to be but vanity and vexation of spirit. This desire for happiness is good, for it leads us through innumerable experiences, so that the soul can realize, by practical experience, the emptiness of all self-seeking, and thus learn wisdom. After running the whole gamut of experience, the soul learns at last that happiness is not something that can be found by seeking, but is an inward mental state. Although work, well done, brings a quiet sense of satisfaction, and success in one's career may also be a source of gratification for a short time, yet even these cannot satisfy the deep longing of the soul. Happiness, however, is to be found in service. Not if we seek happiness in service and serve in order to be happy, but if we serve others for the sake of serving, we find the only happiness that will endure and satisfy. One has only to observe the lives of those who are always selfishly seeking and grabbing, who are hard in their dealings, and always looking after number one, in order to see how impossible it is for self-seekers to be happy. It does not matter whether they acquire riches or remain poor. They are equally unhappy. In contrast to this, you have only to go out of your way to do a kind and perfectly disinterested action and experience the glow of sheer happiness that it brings, in order to realize that you are dealing with a law of life that is as sure and unalterable as the law of gravitation. There must be a purpose in life, and this must have for its object the betterment of the lives of others, either few or many. The law of service must be obeyed, otherwise there can be no happiness. This may fill some readers with dismay, for they may be employed in an occupation that apparently does no good to anybody. They may feel that if they were engaged in some noble enterprise for the uplift of humanity, then they could truly serve. But in their present occupation this is impossible. To think thus is very natural, yet the truth is, we can all obey the law of service and begin now, in our present occupation, no matter what it may be. We have only to do our daily work, not as a task which must be gotten through in order to bring us a living, or because it is expected of us that we should work, but as an offering of love to life and the world, in order to come into harmony with the great law of service. Our ideas of values with regard to occupations are altogether erroneous from the inner wisdom point of view. The scrubbing of a doorstep, if faithfully done in a true spirit of service, is of as much value and real importance as the writing of a deathless poem or dying for one's country. We can never truthfully say that one act of service is of greater value or is more important than another. All that the higher law looks at is the motive. Therefore, if your motive is right, you can be engaged in the humblest and apparently most useless occupation and yet be happy, because you satisfy the law of service. Another road to happiness is the conquest of the lower nature, the overcoming of weaknesses, the climbing to higher and better things. There is intense happiness in realizing daily that old habits are being overthrown, weak points in the character built up, and an ever-increasing state of liberty and freedom entered into. Thank God, We do not have to remain as we once were, but we can progress upwards indefinitely, for there is no limit to our upward climb. But there is a state that is far higher in happiness, and this is joy. Happiness comes through service and overcoming, but joy comes only to one who realizes his oneness with his divine source. The reality is ineffable joy. Behind this world of shadows is the real spiritual world of splendor and delight. When the soul, after its immense journey through matter, time, and space, at last finds its way back to its divine source, it becomes aware of this intense joy, too great to be described in words. It not only realizes that the reality is joy, and the universe filled not with groans or sighing, but with the sweet, quiet laughter of freed souls. It is also itself filled with this ineffable joy. What has all this got to do with practical everyday life, it may be asked? Everything, for the one who possesses this quiet joy can never be defeated in life's battles. He has something within him that can never be quenched and will lead him from victory to victory. Chapter 12. The Use and Misuse of Mental and Spiritual Powers. The average individual knows nothing of mental forces, and although he may suffer from the effects of unconscious wrong thinking, yet he is in no danger of making deliberate misuse of the inner powers. One, however, who has learned how to use these interior forces must be very careful to use them aright, or he will find that the invisible powers of mind and spirit are far more powerful and destructive than dynamite. It is not meant by this that he can blow himself up, but it does mean that he can injure himself not only in this life, but for ages to come, and in addition, seriously retard his spiritual evolution. All use of the mind to coerce other people or to influence them by means of suggestion, not for their benefit but for your advantage, is highly destructive, not to them actually, but to you. On the face of it, it looks an easy road to success and prosperity, but actually it leads to failure and poverty. The misuse of the mental powers in this way is really a form of black magic, and the fate of all black magicians is terrible. Even the use of mind to coerce other people for their good is not desirable. It never does any real good, although it may seem beneficial for a time, and its use, therefore, is to be deprecated. Healing, so-called, by heterosuggestion is not permanent, for as soon as the healer ceases to pump suggestion into the patient, the latter begins to relapse into his former state. Far better results accrue if the patient is taught to use auto or self-suggestion for himself. It is seen, then, that the use of the mind to influence others is distinctly harmful if it is used selfishly. Hypnotism is harmful no matter which way it is used, and is also detrimental to the patient. Because of this, some of our more thoughtful neurologists have given up its use. We have no right to endeavor to influence other people by the use of our inner forces, even if our object is their good. Each soul has the right to live its life in its own way, and to choose for itself either good or evil. That is the object of life, so that each evolving soul should learn wisdom through the lessons learned as a result of its own mistakes. Far worse is it if others are coerced, not in order to help them, but to defraud them, or to make them buy goods they do not require, or sign agreements they would not otherwise put their name to. One who misuses his mental and spiritual powers literally smashes his life. He works against the laws of life and the universe, and encompasses his own ruin. There is, however, a far more subtle way of misusing the mental and spiritual forces than by coercion, mind domination, and heterosuggestion. This method is equally destructive, and, if persisted in, builds up a painful future. With this method, other people are not influenced or dominated, but the finer forces of nature are coerced by the human will. Mental demands are made on the invisible substance from which, we are told, all things are made, and wealth is compelled to appear. In addition to this, sickness, so it is claimed, is banished, and the invisible forces of life are compelled to operate in such a way as to make life's pathway a bed of roses without thorns, so that life becomes shorn of all its discipline and experience. Its devotees enter the silence, and there visualize exactly what they think they want, and compel it to appear in material form by the strength of their desire or through the exercise of their will. Some followers of this cult may be able to make an apparent success of it, but I have never met any yet. If they do, however, they will live to regret it, for they are merely practitioners of black magic. Their efforts are of the same nature as sorcery. Entering the silence is a good thing. It is really entering the inner silence of the inner sanctuary, where the divine spirit abides in fullness. To misuse this inward power for selfish and material ends, and for forcing our human will upon life so as to make it conform to what we think it ought to be, is a crime of the first magnitude, which can only result in ultimate failure and disaster. Chapter 13. Overcoming Limitations and Awakening Inward Powers. Limitations can be overcome through a realization of truth. When we say this, it is taken for granted that every effort will be made on the physical plane. It is necessary to bathe, exercise, and breathe fresh air in order to be well. It is equally necessary to work hard and to give the best of which we are capable in service in exchange for that which we receive in the way of supply if we are to be successful. If you keep a gardener, you must pay him. The money that you pay him is part of what you have earned by the sweat of your brain. Therefore, you exchange the work of your brain for the labor of his hands, and you are mutually helped and helpful to one another, both giving and receiving, and each one serving life according to his ability. Taking all this for granted, we will pass on to the metaphysical side of our subject. This, by the way, is vastly more important, but the outer practical work is indispensable nevertheless. In order to overcome limitations, it is necessary to know the truth and to live in the consciousness of it. For instance, if ill health is our limitation, then in order to become free, it is necessary that we live in the consciousness of the wholeness of God and His divine idea. If our limitation is restricted means, it is necessary that we live in the consciousness of the inexhaustible and unlimited nature of the substance from which the Creator brings everything into manifestation. If our limitation is disharmony and unhappiness, then we must become attuned to the divine harmony in such a way and to such an extent as to cause it to be reflected into the outer life. No matter what our limitation may be, we can find liberation and deliverance by looking to our divine source, realizing that in the perfect reality all our wants are supplied, and then living in the consciousness of this truth. Ill health is, apart from physical causes, an outward sign of an inward warfare or disharmony caused by wrong thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and attitude of mind and soul towards life and God. In other words, the life is lived in an error consciousness of disease and sickness. First, the inward life has to be adjusted in such a way as to harmonize with the laws of our own being and the divine purpose of life. There must be an inward surrender to the love principle, after which the thoughts must be brought under control so that health-destroying emotions may no longer impair the health. Further, the whole consciousness must as often as possible be raised to a realization of the perfect wholeness which is the reality. If this course is persevered with, a consciousness of health and wholeness becomes a permanent mental state, with the result that health becomes manifested in the life. The outward life is always a reflection or external manifestation of what we are within, or our state of consciousness. Therefore, everything depends upon which kind of consciousness it is in which we live. One who lives in the mental atmosphere of divine wholeness, health, and harmony unconsciously directs all the inner forces of nature into health channels. On the other hand, one who lives in a mental atmosphere of ill health, as sick and unhealthy people often do, unconsciously directs all his subconscious activities in such a way as to produce sickness and disease. Again, with regard to lack of means or supply, this state can also be overcome spiritually only by living in a higher consciousness of abundance and sufficiency. This affects, unconsciously, every action in such a way as to bring about a better state of affairs. On the other hand, one who lives in a mental atmosphere of limitation and lack unconsciously directs all his actions towards the production in his life of poverty and restricted means. The same rule applies no matter what the limitations of one's life may be. Freedom can be gained only by realizing the truth about life and being. When we realize the truth, live in the consciousness of it, and become obedient to the laws of life and being, the life becomes increasingly free. This does not mean that if we are plain of feature and of a stumpy figure, that we shall become beautiful and graceful. But it does mean that these so-called drawbacks will no longer tie us down, and that others will see in us something far better than mere regularity of feature and beauty of form. When the soul is alive and the life filled with love, the homeliest face becomes attractive. Neither does it mean that we shall not suffer bereavements and sorrows, difficulties and adversities, But it does mean that we shall cease intensifying these things and creating further troubles by taking life's disciplines in the wrong spirit. It also means that we shall be able to overcome all life's difficulties and trials, become a conqueror in the strife, and in so doing build up character. Thus, the storms of life, instead of destroying us, can succeed only in making us stronger. Thus, our fate depends not on the storms of life, but on how we meet them. If we give in to them, or, thinking they are evil and not a necessary discipline, rebel against them, then we become shipwrecked on a desolate shore. If, however, we are armed with the knowledge of truth, we can set our sails in such a way as to compel the storms of life actually to help us towards the desired haven. The first step in the direction of knowledge of the truth is right thinking. Every negative thought must be transmuted into its positive opposite. For instance, hate and dislike into love and goodwill, fear into confident trust, poverty into abundance, evil into absolute good, and so on. This will be found to be not easy, but it is possible. And the power to control one's thoughts increases if one perseveres continually with the passing of the years. A beginner cannot, naturally, expect to be able to exercise the same control as one who has been perseveringly seeking self-mastery for years, but he can make substantial progress and learn from day to day. The result of thinking in this way is surprising. The reversal of thought may appear at first to be simplicity itself, and to lead nowhere in particular, but after a time the vastness of the subject becomes almost appalling. The cultivation and practice of right thinking gradually leads to a knowledge of the truth. Not an intellectual knowledge of the truth, but a realization by the soul of the truth. This is the knowing of the truth which sets men free. We can then look through all the ages and know that all is well. The heavy burden which has oppressed us for so long rolls from our shoulders, and we become free. Arousing inward powers. Man is heir to wonderful and illimitable powers, but until he becomes aware of them and consciously identifies himself with them, they lie dormant and unexpressed, and might as well not exist as far as their use to man in his unawakened state is concerned. When, however, man becomes awakened to the great truth that he is a spiritual being, when he learns that the little petty self and finite personality are not his real self at all, but merely a mask to the real man, when he realizes that the spiritual ego, a true divine spark of, or branch or twig of, the eternal Logos, is his real self, when he understands that his body is not himself, that his mind is not himself, and that even his soul is not himself, being but vehicles through which he seeks expression, but that he is spirit, deathless, diseaseless, eternal, forming an integral part of the one spirit and being identical with it, he enters a new life of almost boundless power. It is unwise to engage in any mystical practices in an attempt to force development and unfoldment. Mystical trances are highly dangerous and are also unnecessary. Psychic experiences and the awakening of psychic centers are also dangerous and lead away from our goal. Breathing exercises whose object is to awaken inner powers are highly dangerous and are to be condemned in consequence. The cultivation of negative passivity, such as inhibiting all thought and making oneself quite passive and open to any influence, is also highly dangerous and should be strictly avoided. In place of all these unwise practices, a short time should be set aside each night, and also in the morning, if possible, for getting into touch with reality. You should then endeavor to realize that the body, mind, and soul are vehicles of expression, mere servants of the true self or ego. This will bring about, in time, a consciousness of identity with the one eternal Spirit, what Jesus called our Father in heaven. One might proceed in this fashion. My body is not myself, but is merely something that enables me to live this material life and gain experience. My mind is not myself, but merely an instrument which I use and which obeys my will. My soul is not myself, but merely a garment of my spirit. My will is not myself, but is something of which I, the true self, make use of. By such means you gradually approach the great truth which cannot be put into words and which can only become yours through realization or inward spiritual understanding. In addition, one can use a positive statement of truth reverently but with full confidence, such as, I am a branch in the true vine. In the course of time, you will become possessed of a feeling of tremendous and unlimited power and security. This is a great responsibility, for this power must be used only in service and not for selfish purposes. If it is used for the acquisition of wealth and the gaining of temporal power, great disaster will be the inevitable result. Yet, if used aright, it is bound to have a great, though unconscious, influence for good on your life, and for this you are not responsible. Constantly endeavor to serve and bless others, then, because you do not seek them. Crowds of blessings will come into your life unbidden, great happiness being one of the chief. Having found the kingdom of heaven, it will be your experience that all needed goodwill be added unto you. This power may also be used to strengthen character, to overcome in the conflicts of the soul, and to build up the spiritual body, which will be our vehicle of expression in higher realms. The End.